The 12 Chairs by Ilf and Petrov. Chapter 2. Madame Petchukov's Demise. Claudia Ivanovna lay on her back with one arm under her head. She was wearing a bright apricot-colored cap of the type that used to be in fashion when ladies wore the chanticleer, and had just begun to dance the tango. Claudia Ivanovna's face was solemn, but expressed absolutely nothing. Her eyes were fixed on the ceiling. Claudia Ivanovna called Ippolit Matveyevitch. His mother-in-law moved her lips rapidly, but instead of the trumpet-like sounds to which his ear was accustomed, Ippolit Matveyevitch only heard a groan, soft, high-pitched, and so pitiful that his heart gave a leap. A tear suddenly glistened in one eye and rolled down his cheek like a drop of mercury. "Claudia Ivanovna," repeated Vorobieninov, "what's the matter?" But again he received no answer. The old woman had closed her eyes and slumped to one side. The agronomist came quietly into the room and led him away like a little boy taken to be washed. "She's dropped off. The doctor didn't say she was to be disturbed. Listen, dearie, run down to the chemist's. Here's the prescription. Find out how much an ice bag costs." Ippolit Matveyevitch obeyed Madame Kuznetsov, sensing her indisputable superiority in such matters. It was a long way to the chemist's. Clutching the prescription in his fist like a schoolboy, Ippolit Matveyevitch hurried out into the street. It was almost dark, but against the fading light the frail figure of Bezenchuk could be seen leaning against the wooden gate, munching a piece of bread and onion. The three nymphs were squatting beside him, eating porridge from an iron pot and licking their spoons. At the sight of Vorobieninov, the undertaker sprang to attention like soldiers. Bezenchuk shrugged his shoulders petulantly and, pointing to his rival, said, "Always in my way, durn him." In the midst of the square, near the bust of the poet Zhukovsky, which was inscribed with the words, "Poetry is God in the sacred dreams of the earth," an animated conversation was in progress following the news of Claudia Ivanovna's stroke. The general opinion of the assembled citizens could have been summed up as, "We all have to go sometime, and what the Lord gives, the Lord takes back." The hairdresser Pierre and Constantine, who also answered readily to the name of Andrew Ivanovitch, by the way, once again took the opportunity to air his knowledge of medicine acquired from the Moscow magazine Ogoniok. "Modern science," Andrew Ivanovitch was saying, "has achieved the impossible. Take this, for example. Let's say a customer gets a pimple on his chin. In the old days, that usually resulted in blood poisoning. But they say that nowadays in Moscow, I don't know whether it's true or not, a freshly sterilized shaving brush is used for every customer." The citizens gave long sighs. "Aren't you overdoing it a bit, Andrew? How could there be a different brush for every person? That's a good one." Prusis, a former member of the proletariat intelligentsia and now a private stall owner, actually became excited. "Wait a moment, Andrew Ivanovitch. According to the latest census, the population of Moscow is more than 2 million. That means they need more than 2 million brushes. It seems rather curious." The conversation was becoming heated, and heaven only knows how it would have ended had not Ippolit Matveyevitch appeared at the end of the street. "He's off to the chemist's again. Things must be bad. The old woman will die. Bezenchuk isn't running round the town in a flurry for nothing. What does the doctor say?" "What doctor?" "Do you call those people in the social insurance office doctors? They're enough to send a healthy man to his grave." Pierre and Constantine, who had been longing for a chance to make a pronouncement on the subject of medicine, looked around cautiously and said, "Hemoglobin is what counts nowadays." Having said that, he fell silent. The citizens also fell silent, each reflecting in his own way on the mysterious power of hemoglobin. When the moon rose and cast its minty light on the miniature bust of Zhukovsky, a rude word could clearly be seen chalked on the poet's bronze back. This inscription had first appeared on June 15, 1897, the same day that the bust had been unveiled, and despite all the efforts of the Tsarist police and later the Soviet militia, the defamatory word had reappeared each day with unfailing regularity. The samovars were already singing in the little wooden houses with their outside shutters, and it was time for supper. The citizens stopped wasting their time and went their way. A wind began to blow. In the meantime, Claudia Ivanovna was dying. First she asked for something to drink, then said she had to get up and fetch Ippolit Matveyevitch's best boots from the cobbler. One moment she complained of the dust, which, as she put it, was enough to make you choke, and the next asked for all the lamps to be lit. Ippolit Matveyevitch paced up and down the room, tired of worrying. His mind was full of unpleasant, practical thoughts. He was thinking how he would have to ask for an advance at the Mutual Assistance Office, fetch the priest, and answer letters of condolence from relatives. To take his mind off these things, Ippolit Matveyevitch went out on the porch. There, in the green light of the moon, stood Bezenchuk the undertaker. "So how would you like it, Mr. Vorobyaninov?" asked the undertaker, hugging his cap to his chest. "Yes, probably," answered Ippolit Matveyevitch gloomily. "Does the nymph Janet really give good service?" said Bezenchuk, becoming agitated. "Go to the devil, you make me sick." "I'm not doing nothing. I'm only asking about the tassels and brocade. How shall I make it? Best quality, or how?" "No tassels or brocade. Just an ordinary coffin made of pine wood. Do you understand?" Bezenchuk put his finger to his lips to show that he understood perfectly, turned round, and managing to balance his cap on his head, although he was staggering, went off. It was only then that Ippolit Matveyevitch noticed that he was blind drunk. Ippolit Matveyevitch felt singularly upset. He tried to picture himself coming home to an empty, dirty house. He was afraid his mother-in-law's death would deprive him of all those little luxuries and set ways he had acquired with such effort since the Revolution, a revolution which had stripped him of much greater luxuries and a grander way of life. Should I marry? He wondered. But who? The militia chief's niece, or Barbara Stepanova, Prusis's sister? Or maybe I should hire a housekeeper. But what's the use? She would only drag me around the law courts, and it would cost me something too. The future suddenly looked black for Ippolit Matveyevitch. Full of indignation and disgust at everything around him, he went back into the house. Claudia Ivanovna was no longer delirious. Lying high on her pillows, she looked at Ippolit Matveyevitch, in full command of her faculties, and even sternly, he thought. "Ippolit Matveyevitch," she whispered clearly, "sit close to me. I want to tell you something." Ippolit Matveyevitch sat down in annoyance, peering into his mother-in-law's thin, bewhiskered face. He made an attempt to smile and say something encouraging, but the smile was hideous, and no words of encouragement came to him. An awkward wheezing noise was all he could produce. "Ippolit," repeated his mother-in-law, "do you remember our drawing-room suite?" "Which one?" asked Ippolit Matveyevitch, with that kind of polite attention that is only accorded to the very sick. "The one upholstered in English chintz." "You mean the suite in my house?" "Yes, in Stargorod." "Yes, I remember it very well. A sofa, a dozen chairs, and a round table with 6 legs. It was splendid furniture, made by Hams. But why does it come to mind?" Claudia Ivanovna, however, was unable to answer. Her face had slowly begun to turn the color of copper sulfate. For some reason, Ippolit Matveyevitch also caught his breath. He clearly remembered the drawing-room in his house and its symmetrically arranged walnut furniture with curved legs, the polished parquet floor, the old browned grand piano, and the oval black-framed daguerreotypes of high-ranking relatives on the walls. Claudia Ivanovna then said in a wooden, apathetic voice, "I sewed my jewels into the seat of a chair." Ippolit Matveyevitch looked sideways at the old woman. "What jewels?" he asked mechanically, then, suddenly realizing what she had said, added quickly, "Weren't they taken when the house was searched?" "I hid the jewels in a chair," repeated the old woman stubbornly. Ippolit Matveyevitch jumped up, and taking a close look at Claudia Ivanovna's stony face lit by the paraffin lamp, saw she was not raving. "Your jewels?" he cried, startled at the loudness of his own voice. "In a chair? Who induced you to do that? Why didn't you give them to me?" "Why should I have given them to you when you squandered away my daughter's estate?" said the old woman quietly and viciously. Ippolit Matveyevitch sat down and immediately stood up again. His heart was noisily sending the blood coursing around his body. He began to hear a ringing in his ears. "But you took them out again, didn't you? They're here, aren't they?" The old woman shook her head. I didn't have time. You remember how quickly and unexpectedly we had to flee? They were left in the chair, the one between the terracotta lamp and the fireplace. But that was madness. You're just like their daughter, shouted Ippolit Matveyevitch loudly. And no longer concerned for the fact that he was at the bedside of a dying woman, he pushed back his chair with a crash and began prancing about the room. I suppose you realize what may have happened to the chairs, or do you think they're still there in your drawing room in my house, quietly waiting for you to come and get your jewelry? The old woman did not answer. The registry clerk's wrath was so great that the pince-nez fell off his nose and landed on the floor with a tinkle, the gold nosepiece glittering as it passed his knees. What? 70,000 rubles worth of jewelry hidden in a chair? Heaven knows who may sit on that chair. At this point, Claudia Ivanovna gave a sob and leaned forward with her whole body towards the edge of the bed. Her hand described a semicircle and reached out to grasp Ippolit Matveyevitch, but then fell back onto the violet-down quilt. Squeaking with fright, Ippolit Matveyevitch ran to fetch his neighbor. I think she's dying, he cried. The agronomist crossed herself in a business-like way and, without hiding her curiosity, hurried into Ippolit Matveyevitch's house, accompanied by her bearded husband, also an agronomist. In distraction, Vorobey and Ninov wandered into the municipal park. While the two agronomists and their servants tidied up the deceased woman's room, Ippolit Matveyevitch roamed around the park, bumping into benches and mistaking for bushes the young couples numb with early spring love. The strangest things were going on in Ippolit Matveyevitch's head. He could hear the sound of gypsy choirs and orchestras composed of big-breasted women playing the tango over and over again. He imagined the Moscow winter and a long-bodied black trotter that snorted contemptuously at the passers-by. Ippolit Matveyevitch began walking more slowly and suddenly stumbled over the form of Bezenchuk the undertaker. The latter was asleep, lying in the middle of the path in his fur coat. The jolt woke him up. He sneezed and stood up briskly. Now don't you worry, Mr. Vorobyaninov, he said heatedly, continuing the conversation started a while before. There's lots of work goes into a coffin. Claudia Ivanovna's dead, his client informed him. Well, God rest his soul, said Bezenchuk. So the old lady's passed away. Old ladies pass away, or they depart this life. It depends who she is. Yours, for instance, was small and plump, so she passed away. But if it's one who's a bit bigger and thinner, then they say she has departed this life.
What do you mean they say? Who says?
We say, the undertakers. Now you, for instance, you're distinguished-looking and tall, though a bit on the thin side. If you should die, God forbid, they'll say you popped off. But a tradesman who belonged to the former Merchants Guild would breathe his last, and if it's someone of lower status, say a caretaker or a peasant, we say he is croaked or gone west. But when the higher-ups die, say a railway conductor or someone in administration, they say he has kicked the bucket. They say, you know, our bosses kick the bucket, don't you? Shocked by this curious classification of human mortality, Ippolit Matveyevitch asked, And what will the undertaker say about you when you die? I'm small fry. He'll say Bezenchuk's gone and nothing more. And then he added grimly, It's not possible for me to pop off or kick the bucket. I'm too small. But what about the coffin, Mr. Vorobyaninov? Do you really want one without tassels or brocade? But Ippolit Matveyevitch, once more immersed in dazzling dreams, walked on without answering. Bezenchuk followed him, working something out in his fingers and muttering to himself as he always did. The moon had long since vanished, and there was a wintry cold. Fragile wafer-like ice covered the puddles. The companions came out on Comrade Gubernsky Street, where the wind was tussling with the hanging shop signs. A fire engine drawn by skinny horses emerged from the direction of Staropin Square with a noise like the lowering of a blind. Swinging their canvas legs from the platform, the firemen wagged their helmeted heads and sang in intentionally tuneless voices, Glory to our fire chief, glory to dear Comrade Pumpoff. They've been having a good time at Nicky's wedding, remarked Bezenchuk nonchalantly. He's the fire chief's son. And he scratched himself under his coat. So you really want it without tassels and brocade? By that moment, Ippolit Matveyevitch had finally made up his mind. I'll go and find them, he decided, and then we'll see. And in his jewel-encrusted visions, even his deceased mother-in-law seemed nicer than she had actually been. He turned to Bezenchuk and said, Go on then, damn you, make it, with brocade and tassels.